Hi everybody and welcome back to the Dirt Diaries. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a new episode or new archaeological discovery. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, don't forget to rate and comment. It really helps me out. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and comment. I love seeing all of your thoughts, theories, and more. And if you're new here, hi, I hope you love ancient history, archaeology, mythology, mystery, and more as much as I do, because my name is Dr. Tenninger Kellenberger and I bring the ancient world to you. Because no, this is not ancient aliens. This is the real thing, and of course, these are the Dirt Diaries. As always, a special shout out and hello to those lounging in the villa, taking notes in the library, or snooping in the restricted section over on Patreon. Well, last time on the Dirt Diaries, we cracked open an over 2,000-year-old tomb just outside of Naples to see just exactly what is going on inside. There we found the walls lined in paintings of myth, crafted in fresco, and dove directly into the underworld to discuss the mythology of Heracles as he leads Cerberus out of the underworld in the main scene of the tomb of Cerberus. But today we're closing that tomb and we're heading over a hop, skip, and a jump over to Greece this time, specifically Athens. And to keep up with the spooky month theme, we're talking about a cursed find. Not that this find cursed who discovered it, but it was in fact the finding of ancient curses buried over 2,000 years ago. That's right, we're talking the cursed well of Athens. And the find today, while not as recent as the tomb of Cerberus, is still pretty recent in the realm of archaeology discoveries. Because back in 2016, archaeologists from the German Archaeological Institute, well, they came across a crazy find in Athens. But not where you would expect it. Not at the Acropolis, not at the Parthenon, none of that kind of stuff. They made this incredible discovery in the downtown neighborhood of Keramikos. And back in the ancient day and age, Keramikos was an area that was used as a burial ground for the ancient citizens of Athens. And well, in June 2016, archaeologists, they were excavating a well here, situated within a bathhouse right in front of the Dipolon Gate. And it's in this well that archaeologists uncovered about 30 new curse tablets. Yes, we are in spooky month, so it felt appropriate to talk about the cursed well today. Hence the frog little headband. I thought frogs and wells would kind of go together, give the devil horns a break this week. So the tablets in this well, these 30 new tablets, they were discovered at the bottom of a 2,500-year-old well. And if you have your ancient time period chronology tables out, this places us in the classical period of ancient Greece. And just for reference, if it helps anybody out, the classical period is actually the same time that the Parthenon is being constructed on top of the Acropolis. The classical period is also where we get the Battle of Thermopylae, all of that kind of stuff. Hellenistic period, for the chronology kitty cats out there, Hellenistic period actually comes following the death of Alexander the Great, and that actually takes us to about 3130 BCE when Augustus would take control of Rome and make it actually the Roman Empire. So from the 30 tablets that were discovered, some of the tablets were actually uninscribed, meaning no inscriptions were found on them. They were just lead tablets, or from the photos, you can actually see that they look like lead kind of lumps. And because we have these little pieces of lead that are rolled or balled or anything like that, we don't actually know their function because they don't have any inscriptions on it. And we will talk about inscriptions and cursing later on. But that's where this is kind of interesting, because while 30 lead tablets were found, I don't know if all of them would be considered curse tablets. And prior to this discovery in this well, this ancient burial ground actually has a long history of cursed tablets, cursed dolls, and more being uncovered here. Yes, back in the ancient day, it wasn't just cursed tablets, there were also cursed dolls. In total, from the excavations going on in this entire site, around 80 cursed tablets have been uncovered and around 4 cursed dolls. And this site specifically, in terms of curses, cursed tablets, cursed dolls, and more, well, it's been kind of in the forefront of scholars' minds since 1912. Because 1912 is actually where we start getting these first instances of cursed tablets and cursed dolls actually starting to pop up in excavations. And back in 1912, when these were starting to pop up, it wasn't that they were popping up in other wells, nay, they were actually popping up in graves, yeah. But from 1912, we don't really see any of these cursed tablets, curses, anything, even inscriptions. We don't see them being published until 1941, when they are actually published in the inscription volume of the Keramikos series. So that's quite a bit of time that they're kind of just remaining unpublished, out of sight, out of mind. Nobody really knows about them. And this happens quite a lot with ancient inscriptions. But in 1958, one of the most famous lead tablets to come out of this burial ground was uncovered, and it was almost instantly published. And this is actually known as the Curse of Nessimos. And this curse is actually really interesting because it has his name on a doll. And we'll come to dolls later on. But this one's really, really fascinating because it doesn't spell good news for Nessimos. No, somebody is out to get him. And that's really iterated in a scary tone in the curse that doesn't promise great things. It really kind of promises death. And it's not just a lead tablet that we see with this curse specifically. His name is actually on the side of a doll, and this doll is actually put in almost a mock sarcophagus, if that makes sense. And since then, more tablets have been published from other excavations, and over time, really since the 1950s, the published cursed tablets and their inscriptions, well, not only were they published, but they've been republished, retranslated, all of that kind of stuff, so that archaeologists and scholars can get a better understanding of the cursing culture that was going on in this burial ground back in classical Greece. Because curses actually tell us so much about society because, plot twist, while there's so much fascination with ancient curses, ancient magic, and more, not everybody was doing it. Okay, back to the new 30 that were uncovered. So, as I said earlier, these were uncovered in a well, and this is not the only well to have been excavated or known about in this site. And after they were uncovered in 2016, in 2017 and 2018, they were cleaned, photographed, and then they were sent over for reflectance transformation imaging, also known as RTI. Now, with these new lead tablets that were uncovered, again, they're coming from a well and not a grave. And this is really, really interesting because previous excavations of graves here have uncovered cursed tablets, cursed dolls, little mini sarcophagi. But now we're seeing lead tablets being uncovered in wells. So out of all of the wells that are known at this site, that are known or excavated at this site, only 2 of them contain cursed tablets or lead tablets. One is known as B1, which is located in the courtyard of the Dippelon Gate, and B34, which is the one from the bathhouse that we're talking about specifically. And many of you who are watching, you actually may recognize this image from when this find was announced, because this image truly lives up to the idea of what a cursed well of Athens would appear as. If I say cursed well of Athens, instantly this image should come to mind. I don't know what it is, how they captured literal almost fog coming out of here. It is so cool. It is so spooky. It is so perfect. And I remember when this was first reported on and when all of the news outlets were showing these images, I remember looking at these images and being like, this is exactly why I became an archaeologist. But also, it's so spooky. It's so perfect. It really lives up to its hype. How could it not? It's a cursed well of Athens. And what's also crazy is it'll be 10 years since its discovery next summer, which is kind of crazy when you put things into perspective because May of 2026 will actually be my 10-year anniversary of graduating from undergrad, which is kind of crazy to put that into perspective. Okay, so why, you might be wondering, why are cursed tablets or lead tablets, why are these being found in wells? Why are you cursing wells? Well, you're not actually cursing the well, but you're depositing curses in wells. And wells were pretty popular as kind of a ancient drop-off box to the underworld back in the ancient day and time, so that your curse could be heard by underworld gods. This well here in Athens is not uncommon, for we know of other wells with curse tablets being deposited in them throughout Greece. And even in later papyrus writings in antiquity, they actually note that wells are a great place to drop off your curse. Some of these inscriptions are almost akin to, in a pinch, drop it in a well. I don't know why, it's also kind of giving Beetlejuice. And you may be wondering, are wells tied to the underworld? Yes and no. No specifically in the aspect of being directly connected to the underworld, but yes in the sense that they have ties or associations to the underworld. Confusing, I know, but let me explain. Back in the ancient day, places that had connections to water, whether it be wells, streams, creeks, lakes, rivers, anything like that. Well, many of the ancients actually believed that these areas associated with water had connections to the underworld, some of which were actually believed to be entrances into the underworld. And I know it kind of goes hand in hand with what we were talking about last time on the Dirt Diaries podcast with the tomb of Cerberus, because Heracles had to, go and find an entrance to the Greek underworld, with many ancient necromancy sites claiming to have an entryway. And another great example of a site that was believed to be a direct entrance into the underworld is at the Necromantion, so the site that performed necromancies. It's actually located on mainland Greece, and this is the Necromantion of Acheron. And you might be thinking, Acheron? Yeah, Acheron was one of the rivers in the Greek underworld that was believed to separate, depending on the source, the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. And I say depending on the source because in some instances, writers are noting that it's the Acheron that Charon, the ferryman, he is ferrying souls across, but in other writings, it's noted that it's the Styx. So it kind of depends on the source author. But yes, the Acheron was an infernal river of the underworld, and some actually believe that there was an entryway into the underworld at the Necromantion of Acheron. Because yes, the Acheron was actually a real river. And when you look at this site, it kind of makes sense that this would be an entryway into the underworld. Another necromancy site, I know we briefly talked about Heraclea Pontica very, very briefly last time. There is another one. Of course, we have the Acheron. We also have one in Italy. It is known today as the Lake of Vernus Necromantion, but by the Roman period, it was really out of use. But already, we have Heraclea Pontica, located on the Black Sea. We have the Necromantion of Acheron, located on a river, next to a river, nearby a river. And then we have the one in Italy, which is located by Lake Avernus. What do all of these have in common but being located next to a body of water, which goes hand in hand with the belief that these could act as entrances to the underworld. It's also kind of believed back in the ancient day and time that all rivers and all bodies of water, wherever you went in the ancient Greek understanding of the world, you would end up in the underworld. And for wells, while not, directly connected to a river or a lake or anything like that, like we see here, your curse would actually, hopefully, fingers crossed, make its way into the underworld to be heard by the deities and gods down there with the help of the nymphs who resided and protected these areas. Perhaps they would hear your plea and take your curse directly to the underworld. And where all roads lead to Rome, all ancient waterways lead to the underworld. Now, these curses and curse tablets, they are similar to what we saw with the tomb curses in season 1 of Dirt Diaries, but they are vastly different. Not all curses are created equal. Different curses are used for different things. People weren't just doing curses for tomb protection so that nobody would enter or trespass into the area, but curses that we are seeing deposited in wells and graves, well, they're for more serious matters, I should say. And I'm not saying Trespassing into a tomb is not a serious matter, but these are more matters for the living. And what I mean by this is they're used for a plethora of reasons. For jealousy, for bewitchment, for binding your competition, for justice, for love, for anything and almost everything in the ancient world. If you were trying to get a leg up in an instance, curses could be used for you. And many of these curse tablets, well, they asked or they invoked the gods of the underworld. And the underworld in ancient Greece and the gods of the underworld, well, these are referred to as chthonic, so meaning of the earth or under the earth. Those are the gods who would have resided there. So those gods could include, but are not limited to, we have the king and queen of the underworld, Hades and Persephone. We have Hecate, a darker version of Demeter, Hermes, the Furies, who in ancient Greece were known as the Urines. The Gorgons are down there, Thanatos. There's a lot of not great things. And these gods and beings, they were actually invoked in these curse tablets to cause harm to the individuals listed on the curses. So if graves have a direct connection to the underworld, right, because all of the deceased individuals would be going to the underworld known as Hades, why the change all of a sudden from graves to wells for deposition purposes? Well, it comes back to ancient bureaucracy. Because yes, according to our ancient author buddy Cicero, Demetrius of Phaleron, who governed Athens in the 4th century BCE, well, he actually passes legislation so that curses wouldn't really be thrown into graves anymore. Now, I'm not saying that the law really spelled out you cannot put curses into graves anymore. That's really not what the law was about. But it set parameters and specifics for what headstones could be. They were also upping, I don't want to say security, but they were upping everything, rules and regulations around burial grounds, cemeteries, headstones, and all of that kind of stuff. So you may be wondering, why would there be legislation being passed to deter individuals from placing curses in graves? Well, it's because magic, sorcery, and more was not necessarily smiled upon. It wasn't pro-magic. It wasn't pro-curse tablets. People were doing these things. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Bob's your uncle kind of deal. But these practices were never encouraged. They were always, I should say, discouraged. But magic and sorcery, these were not looked at as great things to be doing in the ancient world. People would side-eye you if you were doing anything hanky-panky. Why would this kind of be looked at as not that great? It's because of the ancient definition of magic. How we understand magic today could be spells, illusion, Harry Potter, anything like that. You instantly have an idea of what magic is. But magic to the ancients, they couldn't give you a specific definition like close-up magic or a card trick or, sawing a person in half, like anything today that you might think of. But they would know it if they saw it. They couldn't tell you right off the back of here's the list of 80 things that are made up of magic, but they would know it if they saw it. And it's really frowned upon in the ancient world because at the heart of ancient magic, you, as an ancient individual, are going against the will of the gods. You are using coercion, magic, sorcery, and more to get what you want and, in a sense, bend the will of the gods to what you want. Now, depending on the region in the Mediterranean world, really from the 6th century BCE, since that's around the time some of the earliest curse tablets have been dated to, all the way through the Roman period, well, we see certain individuals being outlawed or removed from different communities because they are practicing magic and sorcery. This does include later on not having to do with curse tablets, but this also has to do with necromancy being outlawed in the Roman era through different reigns of different emperors because people would have been looking at performing necromancy to find out when a certain ruler might die. Same thing with astrology. We see astrologers in Rome get kicked out and then let back in quite often. Famously, Augustus will kick out astrologers because, again, it was believed that if you looked into somebody's astrological chart, you could figure out how long their reign would be, when they would die, how they would die, all of that kind of stuff. But while our buddy Augustus would kick astrologers out, he would let them back in, and then he would also be using astrological signs such as Capricorn, which he's not a Capricorn. He would be using Capricorn on coins to cement his rulership and to show that he was always meant to rule and unify Rome. Really, it's all about propaganda. Now, in ancient Greece, around this time period, while many citizens would turn their nose up at anybody who was known to perform magic, people were still going to sorceresses, magi, and more to have their needs met. Why? Because not everybody could perform magic in the ancient world. You needed to be not only trained in the arts of how to perform rituals and rites and everything, but you also needed for curse tablets to be literate, or at least know enough of how to write curse tablets to ensure your client got what they needed out of it. It's so interesting because in ancient Greece and Rome, all of the citizens and leaders are saying to everybody, magic and sorcery is bad. And their citizens are like, yes, magic and sorcery is bad. Yes, we understand. I need a curse for this instance. That's literally how it was. It was overall in society seen as bad, and many instances would actually already begin to other the individuals who were performing magic for others. With women specifically for sorceresses, we already begin to see kind of not great imagery being used to describe these women, especially when we look at the witch or sorceress Erchtho, who in ancient texts is absolutely terrifying, especially when we are seeing descriptions of what she does to reanimate corpses, and everything of how it's being described in ancient writings is bone chilling. But maybe we'll talk about necromancy another time. Now, with, the individuals who you would hope would hear your plea for your curse, it wouldn't necessarily be any of the gods that I mentioned before, but it could also be shades of the dead, so different types of deceased individuals, because yes, not all deaths are seen as equal. Some are going to be more preferred when you're cursing, and we'll come to that in a bit. But you also might prefer to summon a demone. And a demone also helps give us the word demon today. But a demone in ancient Greek history and everything is not a god and not a deceased individual. It's actually a spirit. It could be considered a lesser god, a divinity that way, not as important as, say, Hades, Persephone, anything like that. But a daemones could be a personification of a different type of spirit. For example, Thanatos, while a god, is also considered to be a demone. But yeah, just some food for thought with that. Different curses might require different beings to be evoked, invoked, summoned, all of that kind of stuff. So not all the curses in this well were found to date to the classical period. Many actually were found in a layer dating to the early Hellenistic period, which can roughly be dated anywhere from Hellenistic period begins after the death of Alexander, so that's 323, and so early Hellenistic is roughly 323 to 260 BCE. 2 curse tablets were also found in a layer dating to the middle Hellenistic period, so that would take us up to 150 BCE, and then, shockingly, archaeologists and scholars uncovered one curse tablet that dates to the 6th century CE. So one curse tablet out of the 30 uncovered dates to over 500 years after all of the rest, which just goes to show you that people were cursing for quite some time. And from these numbers, not everybody was cursing, but it was something that was done and should be talked about, really, in ancient history and archaeology. Now, not only does the deposition differ from the ones found in tombs, but we also see a vast difference in size, weight, which is really fascinating, I would say. And in honor of curse tablets today, I'm going to try and do a smoky eye lead kind of look, I would say, because we'll talk about materials in a bit, but I think I'm going to go for kind of creating a lead tablet on my eyes, that kind of shimmery sheen. Now, out of all 44 known wells, we only have the two, B1 and B34, that were found to have curse tablets in them, which I would like to know why it's those two by that specific gate. That's now what my mind is starting to think. Why these wells specifically? Now, the chronology of the curse tablets from these two wells are also fascinating because in the larger picture of curse tablets in ancient cursing from ancient Greece and ancient Rome, these tablets from this ancient burial ground are coming 500 years earlier than the ones that have been uncovered in Bath and the ones that have been uncovered in Rome. And these well tablets in both of the wells, they're also being found and dated earlier than any curses being uncovered in the Athenian Agora. So once again, why are the ancient individuals called to deposit curses in these wells and these graves? Why this site? Now we have a mystery on our hands. And considering that is a thought that just came into my mind, as I am getting ready with you all, I don't believe we have an answer. Welcome to archaeology, where you will continue to look at evidence, continue to hypothesize, and come up with more questions, and rarely will you get answers. And while I've talked a lot about the curses that have been uncovered in this well, 30 curse tablets were not the only things to be uncovered. No, archaeologists also uncovered drinking vessels, craters, lamps, cook pots, wooden artifacts, including a wooden trinket box, a wooden pulley, likely from the well, coins, and we even have some organic material found in the form of peach pits, which I like that. That's pretty cool. And some of the tablets also had nails pierced into them. So let's talk about a tablet that has been translated, and then we'll talk about cursing in general, because ancient cursing I can talk about all day long. It's one of my favorite lectures that I get to talk about with my students. And yes, we will talk about cursed dolls, why the nails, and more. So let's look at one that has a translation, because I would like all of your opinions as well on this one specifically. Well, this cursed tablet specifically names a newlywed woman, Glycera, either or, pardon my pronunciation. And specifically, it targets her vulva, noting that our newlywed Glycera, well, she was promiscuous, at least according to the author here. So the Glycera tablet reads as the following, quote, "We curse Glycera, the wife of Dion, to the gods of the underworld, so she be punished on her wedding, and her wedding be unfulfilled. I bind down Glycera, the wife of Dion, to Hermes Arionios of the underworld, her vulva, her debauchery, her vice, and everything of the sinful Glycera." End quote. We got a lot to unpack here, you guys. Let's go ahead and dive in, because I feel like with curse tablets in general, we're only getting a snapshot of the issue at hand, but there's definitely a story behind here. So first to unpack, well, let's start with the target. So, well, we know the target, Glycera, but it's not just any Glycera. Unsure if this is a common name back 2,300 years ago, but the author of this curse tablet is naming this specific Glycera as the wife of Dion. Now, little Dr. 10 tangent. This is pretty common in curse tablets to specifically note the name of the individual and then note who they are associated to. So many times, especially in curses about love or jealousy, we will see so-and-so, daughter of, son of, wife of, husband of. We will see their associations that way. And we see this actually occur time and time again. Why? Because there's a lot of people in the ancient world. And if you're hiring a professional to write this curse tablet for you, you want to ensure that those in the underworld, gods, shades, demones, that they are targeting the correct Glycera, that they are targeting the proper person. You don't want to waste a curse on somebody who shouldn't be cursed. You got to make sure that they know who the target is. So sometimes if it's not just the naming specifically, as we see here, Glycera, wife of Dion, well, in other instances, we will actually see the inscriber either draw a very, very rough figure of the individual, or hair could also be rolled into the curse tablet along with fingernails. Once again, that way, the spirits, the shades, and the gods of the underworld would know who they are explicitly targeting. Now, the author of this tablet is calling in some backup, calling in some help from a god of the underworld, that of Hermes. And we talked about Hermes briefly last week with the Tomb of Cerberus and the fresco painting there. But Hermes is really interesting in Greek mythology because he is a psychopomp. He is also a psychogog, where he can go between the mortal realm, Olympus, and the underworld. He can go into all three realms. He also helps out with transferring souls to the underworld. He helps Thanatos out with that. And yeah, utterly fascinating. So they're calling in the messenger of the gods. But we have an epithet here, Arionios. Now, this is really interesting as an epithet because it has ties mainly to luck and good fortune, but pairing it with Hermes, it could also be delving into the aspect of this epithet having ties to swiftness. So this cursor may be pulling in the aspect of swift Hermes to enact or carry out this curse in a speedy manner, as fast as possible, the ancient ASAP. And personally, that would make the most sense to me, that you would appeal to his swiftness to carry out this curse for you. And what's interesting is we're only seeing Hermes be kind of petitioned here. We're not seeing anybody else. We're not seeing, an ask for a god to also release a shade or to harass them. We're just seeing a reference to swift Hermes. And that speaks to somebody didn't want either this marriage to be carried out or didn't want the marriage to last. So if you don't want that, you need things to be working pretty quick. Now, moving on, because the curse notes that they want her marriage to be unfulfilled. That's also fascinating because that could be in reference to being unfulfilled in the fact of her and her husband couldn't consummate their marriage, therefore it's technically not legal, or unfulfilled in the fact that the cursor doesn't want Glycera to potentially be able to produce children. Unclear which way they're going for here, but both have been seen in curses before. Now, binding her to a god, mentioning her vulva and her debauchery. This is, I don't want to say it's happening on every single curse tablet, but it is pretty normal verbiage to be found on curse tablets in the ancient world, especially when we are seeing a curse being in reference to a woman or breaking up a couple. So the fact that they're mentioning sexual organs like the vulva could also point out that they do not want her consummating her marriage or being able to produce children from their union. But also, when we see sexual organs being mentioned in ancient curse tablets, it also could be because of what the cursor wants to come out of this. So with this, specifically if we're looking at love curses or somebody is trying to break up a couple or a marriage or anything because of jealousy, they are in love with them. They could be the other person in the relationship if we have a love triangle going on. Well, we see mentions of explicit sexual organs being referenced because the cursor is going to be petitioning usually gods of love, so think Aphrodite, Eros, to come in and have the person of their desire almost burn with passion for them. And I always ask my students this. If you are talking to somebody in an early stage of your relationship or you have a crush on somebody, what do you feel? What do you experience as, a person today? You might get butterflies, you might feel warm all over, you might blush, all of that kind of stuff. So the ancients were almost hoping to amplify that, right? Sometimes when you have a crush, you might not be able to eat, sleep, drink, think straight, anything like that. We also see that referenced in ancient curses, especially in terms of love. Now here we can kind of think of it as the same thing. They are going specifically after her sexual organs. It could be because they only want her, Glycera, to burn with passion for them as the other individual, or they are trying to break up the relationship because they don't want them to consummate the marriage and they don't want any children out of this. So it's really, really interesting because the more I read into this curse tablet and think about the other love curses that we see in the ancient world, it seems like this curse might be coming from perhaps a jilted lover of Glycera, maybe somebody who thought that they were going to be able to marry her, maybe somebody who either was, I don't want to say obsessed with her, but perhaps somebody who wanted Glycera for herself, so if they can't have her, they're going to turn to cursing. And what's interesting, and we don't see it on this tablet, but with other tablets or even papyrus, we also see part of the curse say, bind her to X, Y, or Z and have her vulva, have her body, have her heart, have X, Y, and Z burn, or have her not be able to think, have her not be able to sleep, to drink, to eat, until she comes for me. So with that instance, it's kind of creating a contract of hoping that the gods will hear your plea because you are using certain type of commanding language to coerce the gods, shades, and spirits of the underworld to help you. And that only when the object of their desire comes for them will they be released from said curse. But what do you guys think is occurring in this curse? Who do you think it's being written by? Do you think it's being written by a man who has affections for Glycera, who is angry that she married another man? Or do you think it was written by a woman who perhaps wanted to break Glycera and Dion up? Perhaps this woman was in love with Dion. But now thinking about it, it also could be in reference to a woman writing it because they wanted Dion and Glycera got what that individual wanted. And that's the hard part about curses in the ancient world is a lot of times they're anonymous. We don't know who wrote them. And at the end of the day, we don't know the end result. Alrighty, so now that we've talked about the cursed well, we got to dive a little bit more into ancient cursing, dolls, and more. Because while the cursed well of Athens just held curses, why were people cursing? Who were they cursing? And who were they using? So first and foremost, what is a curse in the ancient world? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Curses in the ancient world are really fascinating because it's not like, spooky curses or anything that we think of today with Scooby-Doo, The Mummy, Indiana Jones, and more. So a curse in the ancient world is a wish that evil befalls a person or persons. Now, within this broad definition of cursing, there are different types of curses in the ancient world. And this really has to do with setting, motive, and condition. The most direct curses are maledictions, inspired by feelings of hatred. And we really see this on examples of curse tablets, which are also known as tabella de fictiones in the ancient world. Well, I should say that's the Latin. And these tabella de fictiones, or curse tablets, are usually crafted on thin sheets of lead, and then you would inscribe the curse on it, and there is a specific way that you would have to write it to ensure that your plea would be heard by those below. And the inscriptions would not only name the target of who you are hoping to curse, including people and animals, but it may name gods, daemones, spirits, and more. And when we see examples of motives being listed on these curse tablets, well, they are generally inspired by feelings of envy, jealousy, competition, especially when we look at ancient sports or in the realm of ancient theater. We also see curse tablets about litigation, love, and commerce. And almost always within curse tablets, we never get the reason why. We kind of get it with Glycera, with her debauchery, but that's the only reference to it. We're not seeing, here's how she's not that great, she's this, she's that, she's the third. We're just seeing her debauchery, her vice, nothing more. And that's pretty common with curse tablets. We're never really seeing the why, the argument for, yeah, I'll hear you out if I'm an ancient Greek god. Yeah, you know what? This person does deserve to be cursed. It's just stating what they want the punishment to be. The tablets might be rolled up in many cases and sometimes transfixed or pierced with nails or have needles in them. Sometimes we see the addition of what looks similar to a voodoo doll, but it's just a curse doll. And these are usually made of lead or clay. And with the earliest curse tablets being dated to the 6th century BCE, really some of the earliest curses are found to bear simple formulas, that of I bind so-and-so, I bind this, or I bind the names of. Of course, throughout time and history, these different formulas would become more elaborate in text, in drawings, and more. Really from the 6th century BCE through the 6th century CE. And in the archaeological record, we currently know of 1,500 curse tablets, but not all of them, unfortunately, have been published. Now, when you are depositing them into some graves, you might want to put them in the graves of individuals who met untimely deaths. Why? Because they're going to be a little bit more restless. You might be able to get them on your side. So who was considered to have an untimely death back in the day? Children first and foremost, and others who died before their time. Individuals who were not buried properly or given proper funerary rites. People who were violently killed. Criminals who had been axed to death. And individuals who are likely buried in mass graves, such as soldiers who were killed in action. But if you're not cursing somebody for love, jealousy, or really underlying feelings of visceral hatred, what else could you curse on? Well, you could curse somebody for spells of justice. Yeah, we do have evidence of curses being used to bring justice. Many times it could be somebody who stole something from another individual, whether it is cattle, a plow, you stole from somebody's business. And when it's aspects of justice, we actually see the reason why the individuals should be cursed. Now, a lot of times these curses will not know the names of the individuals who committed the crime. So the curse will say, to the individual who did this, I bind you to, hoping that those who you summon or invoke would be able to locate the culprit. Now, if you were of the upper class, perhaps you could afford a curse tablet that was made out of gold. We do have gold curse tablets, but for the general population, they would be using lead. Lead was cheap. Lead was more readily accessible for more people. And when you inscribe on lead, it gives that silvery sheen to it. Of course, thankfully, because of the environment of Egypt, we do actually have papyrus that have curses on them. And because it was written on organic material in Egypt, it does beg the question of how much has been lost in other areas where the environment just doesn't preserve items that well. in the archaeological record. But there's also curse tablets made of tin, copper, pieces of pottery, and even stone. But we also see in an ancient recipe for a curse that you could inscribe your curse on the wings of a bat and then set the bat free, hoping that the bat will bring your curse to the gods. Now, of course, earlier this year, back in January, I believe, we also got a really interesting curse tablet archaeology find. This was discovered in Orleans, France, and which is outside of Paris. And what's fascinating about this one, not found in a well, found in a grave, actually, it includes Gaulish script, which is an extinct language. So during excavations of an 18th century hospital, well, archaeologists uncovered underneath this hospital was a Roman necropolis. And in this necropolis, they only recovered the remains of men who were buried with their heads right up against a wall. And this is pretty abnormal for Roman burial practices. And within some of these graves, they uncovered 21 lead curse tablets. One of these tablets was actually uncovered between the legs of a deceased individual, and it has been virtually unwrapped with reflectance transformation imaging, like the ones in the cursed well of Athens. Well, some of the words that were uncovered on this newly discovered curse tablet was written in Gaulish, and the curse tablet was dedicated to Mars Rigisamu, which is Gaulish for Mars the Royal. And Mars is, of course, the Roman god of war who also has associations to land fertility. And the entire tablet reads, "To Mars the Royal, who pierces names, it is the bewitchment of these men and women below," who they do have named, "who accomplished the unfortunate and unjust feat, and also those who were accomplices of these men and women." And then, of course, the tablet goes on to list the names of all the men and women who were either directly responsible or accomplices in this. And you might be wondering, what is the crime here? Specifically, this tablet talks of bewitchment. And through these curse tablets, perhaps we can piece the past back together, one personal story at a time. So while not everybody was cursing back in the ancient day and time, those who sought justice and those who perhaps were pushed to their limits left the fate up to the gods. Now, of course, what do you think? Who do you think wrote the curse to Glycera? What do you think happened to her and her husband Dion? And if you heard about the new curse that included Gaulish dedicated to Mars the Royal about the crime of bewitchment, what do you think came of them? And last but certainly not least, have you heard of the cursed well of Athens? And if you could, would you leave a curse in the ancient world? What would it be to? And I will be back again for our final Spooky Month episode next time. As always, keep your books open, stay curious, and I will see you guys next time on the Dirt Diaries.